2651 Spirit Attack. The lighthouse was a place unlike any Sunny had ever seen, and it made him feel uncomfortable. The reason for his unease was easy: there were no shadows on the small island surrounding the great tower, and none within. There were clouds of vapor swirling around the lighthouse, and that vapor was suffused by the radiant silver light. Every tiny droplet of water was reflecting the radiance, making the light omnidirectional, which meant that there was nowhere on the island where light was absent, and therefore no place for shadows to nestle. So, Sunny could not use Shadow Step to travel there. This was a new kind of obstacle for him. In fact, Sunny had not even been aware that his powers could be suppressed this way, so he was quite stumped. Luckily, he still possessed the Shadow Lantern, so returning to the Night Garden was not going to be a problem, but they would still have to brave the dark waters washing the shores of the Eternal City to reach the lighthouse. Unlike the wharf, the lighthouse was located inside Darren's barrier. The Night Garden remained at a distance, drifting at the edge of the outer dome. It was decided that Ether would remain on the bridge of the living ship, controlling it, while the rest of them would proceed to the small island. "What do you think is in the water?" Sunny could not help but sound a little apprehensive. Bloodwave shrugged. "Whatever it is, we'll find out soon." A few minutes later, they plunged into the cold water. An onyx serpent, an azure serpent, and a monstrous killer whale dove into the dark depths and rushed toward the radiant light, racing to get to the shore as fast as possible. Jet, meanwhile, had turned into a wraith and hid inside Sunny's maw. Just seconds after they plunged into the water, Sunny sensed that something was terribly wrong. Curses! He could feel the indestructible plates of the jade mantle slowly eroding away. Beside him, clouds of blood surrounded the enormous killer whale, and further away, Nave's icy scales were becoming covered by a net of cracks. "I see what is going on." There was no single distressing nightmare creature hiding in the waters of the Eternal City. Instead, there was an incalculable number of tiny fish, each no larger than a fingernail, hiding beneath the tumultuous surface of the dark water. The fish were small, but armed with myriad razor-sharp teeth, swarming hungrily around any living thing that entered their hunting grounds. Which was far worse. Sunny could handle a harrowing leviathan or two, but a myriad of tiny monsters. Actually, he could handle that too. Activating the curse, he used the Shadow Flame and the Weakening Curse to affect a wide area around him, then channeled his death will while augmenting it with the Mercy of Shadow. He was empowering the Shadowbound charm with the Underworld armament and using it as a conduit for his will. As a result, Sunny's killing intent became a lethal force. Considering how numerous tiny abominations he was affecting, each individual one was not weakened that much by the Weakening Curse. However, they were all exposed to the same death will, and therefore they died. Sunny willed it so, and an unimaginable number of tiny abominations were instantly killed. They sustained no wounds, and neither had they been exposed to an attack they could have resisted. The fragile flames of their lives were simply snuffed out. They simply ceased. Naturally, it had only been possible because each individual fish was relatively weak. But, still, it was an eerie and indescribable feeling, to be able to decimate a myriad of nightmare creatures with a mere thought. I guess this can be called a spirit attack, since it was my will that killed them. For a few seconds, Sunny and the Saints of Night received reprieve from being gnawed on by the detestable creatures that populated the waters around the Eternal City. But it was a place foreign to death, after all. Soon enough, the tiny fiends Sunny had destroyed stirred and came back to life, swarming the two great sea serpents and the giant killer whale again. Blood spilled into the cold water once more, and Sunny willed them to die once more. It was quite straining. Sunny, Nave, and Bloodwave fought their way through the infested waters while being eaten alive. Luckily, Sunny could slow down the rate at which they were devoured, and the distance separating them from the small island was not too vast. Soon enough, they were surrounded by radiant light, and could sense solid ground close by. Sunny climbed onto the cold stones and swayed, blinded by the radiance. His shadow sense was useless here, and the light was unbearably bright. Groaning, he shielded his eyes with a hand and jumped away from the water. Jet assumed her corporeal form nearby, unperturbed and entirely dry. Nave and Bloodwave joined them a few seconds later, having already assumed their human shapes. The former glanced pale, but relatively unscathed, while the latter was riddled with ghastly wounds and bleeding heavily. Looking down at his shredded armor, Bloodwave grimaced and wiped the blood off his face. His wounds were already closing, and he did not seem bothered by the pain. If anything, the flowing blood seemed to only make him more furious. No wonder those immortals are reluctant to fall into the water. His tone was flat. Sunny tended to agree. The waters of the Eternal City were teeming with these abominations, and their teeth were dreadfully sharp. Usually, falling into infested waters would merely mean ARAPID and painful death, but things did not die in the Eternal City. Once someone fell into the water here, they were destined to be devoured eternally, endlessly coming to life only to be pierced by tiny teeth and torn apart again, and again, and again, forever. If there was a fate even nightmare creatures would be wary of, that was it. He shuddered. Stay alert. Stripped of shadow sense and surrounded by soft silver radiance, Sunny felt incredibly vulnerable and exposed. His expression darkened. We are inside the barrier, so there can be immortals here. In fact, let's hope that those fiends are the worst thing hiding in this light. Despite how gorgeous the diffused expanse of soft silver light was, Sunny got an eerie feeling from this place. Glancing at his companions, he summoned the shadow lantern and sighed. Let's go. 2652 hidden in the light. The radiant vapor made it hard to see. It was bright enough to be blinding, and without shadows, discerning the form and size of objects was surprisingly difficult. Jade and the Saints of Night seemed to be doing fine, but Sunny had to summon a small shadow out of the shadow lantern and manifest it into a mesh blindfold. After tying it around his eyes, he finally felt better. Being unable to sense his surroundings still made him uneasy, but at least his vision was not severely impaired. It's better than true darkness, at least. If it had been elemental darkness, he would not have even been able to summon the shadows to help him in a moment of need. Sunny, Jet, and the Saints of Night cautiously advanced forward. The island supporting the lighthouse was not very big, but there was still some distance they had to traverse to reach the base of the tower. The ground gently sloped upward, and there was a set of wide steps they followed. Soon enough, however, Sunny gestured for everyone to stop. What's wrong? He remained motionless for a few minutes, then Histon took a step back. A strand of his wet hair fell to the ground, cut cleanly by something incredibly sharp. There was also a deep cut on his forehead, just above his brow. Anybody else would have already been bleeding profusely, but naturally Sunny did not bleed. If he had been a bit taller, though, he would have lost an eye. There's something here. Reaching forward, he felt the air carefully and then grasped an incredibly thin, razor-sharp wire strewn across the road. The wire was so fine that it would have been hard to notice even in normal circumstances, but in the blinding radiance that surrounded them, it was practically invisible. When Sunny pulled on the wire, it glistened subtly, allowing his companions to see. They tensed a little and glanced around, searching for other unseen threats. Proceed with caution. There was another wire there, at the level of Sunny's knee. Bending a little, he stepped over it and continued forward with careful steps. Their progress inevitably slowed. There were more wires awaiting them ahead. The density increased gradually, until there was an entire razor-sharp, invisible fence blocking the road. There were also other traps hidden in the blinding radiance, sharp spikes that protruded from the ground, thin blades embedded into the stone, nets that glistened subtly in the air. Sunny and his companions avoided them without much trouble, but anything larger than a human would have had trouble ascending the slopes of the island toward the lighthouse. Not that it mattered much, considering that the horrors of the Eternal City were immortal. The wires and traps forced Sunny to scout for alternative paths, though. He could have destroyed them, naturally, but there was no telling what that would cause. Traps were often triggered by such actions, after all, not to mention primitive alarm systems. In the end, they had to circle almost the entire island before finding a way up. The lighthouse island was eerily quiet and empty, and they did not meet a single enemy while exploring its mysterious shores. However, Sunny stopped once again only a few hundred meters later. They were still surrounded from all sides by hazy radiance, the vapor feeling refreshingly cool on their faces. He peered into the silver light somberly. Can you hear it? They did. A peculiar, quiet, eerie sound was resounding from the radiant haze ahead, as if something was scraping against the stone. Sunny and his companions advanced cautiously, preparing themselves for battle. They were not prepared for what they found ahead, though. What the hell? Out there, in front of them, a gruesome body was impaled by 6 short, sharp steel spikes. The person had their limbs and head severed, and then arranged on the ground like a macabre display. The torso, the arms, the legs, and the head were each pierced by a spike and held in place by them. The worst part of it all was that the body was still alive. It moved weakly, trying to free itself of the spikes, and thin tendrils of flesh were reaching toward the severed parts, as if wanting to reunite with them. It was the struggles of the severed body that produced the scraping noise. The face was covered by a bloody cloth, but they could see its lips moving under the fabric. Sunny shuddered in revolution. What is this? Knave's voice shook. Sunny remained silent for a few long seconds, then said in a subdued tone, "This is the danger of immortality." Indeed, the grotesque body laying on the ground in front of them belonged to one of the fallen immortals of the Eternal City. Someone had left the abomination here, severed and immobilized, possibly to restrain them, possibly as a punishment. In any case, Sunny had no desire to free that monstrosity from the spikes. After studying the impaled immortal for a bit, they carefully moved around the ghastly body and continued forward. As Sunny and his companions ascended higher, they witnessed a few more similar scenes. Here and there, the fallen immortals were displayed like trophies, weakly trying to set themselves free. Some were nailed to the ground like the first one, some were impaled on tall spikes, some crucified or suspended in nets of razor-sharp wide. Some still looked like humans, while some were no more than abhorrent masses of slithering flesh. There was even a head of a giant bull that was held in place by thick silver chains, its enormous glassy eyes staring at them with hunger and fury. The tongue of the ghastly creature was moving, but its body was nowhere to be seen. The further Sunny went, the darker his mood became. Just what has happened on this island? After circling the lighthouse a few more times and discovering half a dozen cruelly restrained immortals, they approached the great tower. And there, on its steps, they finally found an immortal who was not restrained. 2653 Modern History. Stone steps revealed themselves from the blinding radiance, with tall pillars framing their flawless surface. They ascended steeply into the silver haze, disappearing into the radiant light like the pathway to heaven. There was nothing heavenly about them, though, because not 100 meters lower down the slope, a dreadful mass of vivisected flesh was slithering and straining as it tried to escape the wires that bound it and the spikes that impaled it. The lighthouse was obscured by the radiance, but it was near, looming in the haze. A young man was sitting on the steps, staring at the ground. As Sunny and his companions approached, he slowly raised his head and peered at them with his peculiar, nebulous silver eyes. The youth glanced barely old enough to be called an adult, with gorgeous features and dark, flawless skin. He wore a tunic woven out of flowing, luxurious fabric, and his long hair was tied neatly by a piece of metal wire. As he regarded them with a hollow look, a peculiar, ominous smile twisted his lips. Hearing the nauseating sounds of rippling flesh behind them, Sunny tensed and readied himself. The youth opened his mouth. What escaped it were not revolting tendrils of flesh, however. They were the familiar sounds of the Humar language, instead. "Kid, is that you? Gods, you look old." Sunny froze. Jet seemed stunned and confused, too. Knave's expression was hard to read, while Bloodwave remained his usual concerned self. Staring at the young man somberly, he pursed his lips, and then said in his low voice, "So you're alive after all, scoundrel." The youth studied Bloodwave for a while, not saying anything, then glanced behind him. "Where is Gnosis? Where is Typhaon? Wait a minute." Sunny blinked and then peered into the suit of the young man. To his surprise, there was no darkness inside it, just the pure, radiant light of a transcendent soul core. Bloodwave shrugged. "Dead." The youth fell silent. A few seconds passed and then he chuckled. "What kind of abomination Managek to do those two in?" Knave spoke at that moment, his voice sounding a little hoarse. "It wasn't an abomination. It was the Prince of Nothing." The young man frowned slightly. "Who the hell is the Prince of Nothing?" Knave sighed. "Mordred of Nowhere, the banished son of the King of Swords." The young man blinked a couple of times. "Who the hell is, wait, Anvil? Warden's boy?" Knave nodded silently. The youth studied him for a bit, and then raised an eyebrow. "I see. And who might you be?" Knave stared at him somberly, not saying anything. Sunny, who had been listening to their conversation silently, chose that moment to speak. He already suspected who the peculiar youth was, but wanted to confirm it, so, glancing between Knave and the young man, he asked in a bewildered tone, "Is someone going to do the introductions?" Knave smiled slightly. "Sure, these are Soul Reaper and the Lord of Shadows." He gestured to the youth. "And this is Nightwalker, the founder of our fallen clan. I am glad to see you too, father." Sonk. Sunny was still digesting the fact that Nightwalker, the legendary and mysterious founder of the House of Night, was not only alive but also his buddy Knave's absent dad. The fact that Nightwalker glanced a couple of decades younger than his son was not helping him come to terms with that information, either. "At least I know why Bloodwave doesn't like his clan's founder very much. Now, the bastard got his older sister pregnant." For all the talk about how the House of Night was not a single family, but an alliance of prominent legacy clans of the Stormsia instead, their familial relationships seemed quite complicated. Sunny sighed. After the brief introduction, Nightwalker rose and invited them to follow him. They walked up the stone steps, heading for the lighthouse, or one of the buildings surrounding it, at least. So, can someone catch me up on what has been happening in the world? I am quite curious. Sunny gave him a long look, and, since no one volunteered to speak, said in a neutral tone. Let's see, when was it that Nightwalker had gone missing, again? Actually, nobody outside the House of Night really knew. A Category 5 Nightmare Gate opened in America, so we lost that side of the planet. Immortal Flame and his daughter died there, as well. Broken Sword and his cohort conquered the third nightmare. Then, they conquered the fourth nightmare and became Supremes. Then, Broken Sword was killed by his companions, and they divvied up the world. Nightwalker whistled quietly. So they are Supremes now, huh? Actually, so there are Supremes now, huh? Sunny looked at him. There are 7 Supremes, although 3 of them are already dead. Well, 4, technically. Anyway, Valor, Song, and the House of Night established themselves as the great clans. Broken Sword's daughter got lost in the Dream Realm for a couple of years, then conquered the second nightmare as a sleeper. Antarctica got swallowed by Nightmare Gates, that's one less continent, again. Your son was there, by the way, risking his life to evacuate the civilians. Jet smiled lazily. Was there, as well. Nightwalker studied her with interest. No, actually, why is that bastard leering at Jet? Nightwalker smiled. I'll assume that you are the Soul Reaper. Nice to meet you, young lady. Jet chuckled pleasantly. Please call me Jet, mister. Sunny stared at them, appalled. He coughed. As I was saying, millions of mundane people settled in the Dream Realm. A few years later, Valor and Song went to war. The House of Night attempted to maintain neutrality, but in the end, most of its elders were killed by Mordred, and all of its citadels were usurped. Nightwalker's smile dimmed. One man defeated my entire house. He turned to Knave and Bloodwave with a somber expression. Knave gritted his teeth. That thing can hardly be called a man. Nightwalker remained silent for a long while, then sighed and looked away. Ah, I remember now. That boy was given to the Dreamspawn. It makes sense, then. His voice sounded neither somber nor cheerful, just distant. As if he was talking about the past he had left behind. Sunny shifted slightly. The Dreamspawn again. So Mordred had not lied. Nightwalker and Astarion really did have a history. 2654 family reunion. Sunny studied the back of the young man who was old enough to be his grandfather, wondering what had happened between Nightwalker and Astarion, and when. He was full of questions, but knew that it was not the time to ask them yet. The questions still struggled to climb onto his tongue, though, which made him feel itchy. Sunny was also controlling the besieged Shadow Legion, repelling the harrowing onslaught of the monstrous army of immortals, so there was that as well. He squinted. Weren't you a master? Nightwalker glanced at him, then smiled wryly. I found a seed of nightmare here in the Eternal City. Took me a few tries, but I conquered it eventually. A few tries. Overwhelmed by the implications of these easy words, Sunny briefly wondered who had done it first, Broken Sword and his cohort or Nightwalker. Perhaps it did not matter, in the end. He sighed. Anyway, in the war between Valor and Song, neither Valor nor Song won. Broken Sword's daughter won, instead, killing both Anvil and Key Song, with the help of an extremely dashing sellsword. Who then betrayed her and was promptly killed, as well. They're dating now. Nightwalker slowed down and turned, giving him an incredulous look. Strangely enough, Knave and Bloodwave stared at him with wide eyes, too. Wait. You and Lady Nephis are together. Sunny gave them a dark look. Oh, did I not mention it? There's no need to sound so shocked, you know. Yes, we are. He grinned. We're like two sides of the same coin, she and I. Nightwalker stared at him for a moment, then glanced at Jet. Then, he smiled. Good for you. Sunny tilted his head, suddenly feeling his smile growing strained. Nephis of the Immortal Flame clan, Changing Star, attained supremacy and became the ruler of humanity. Earth is being slowly devoured by the Dream Realm, so hundreds of millions of people are being resettled to the Dream Realm ahead of the apocalypse. We almost lost the Eastern Quadrant to a great terror recently, but a new Supreme ascended and took care of it. That pretty much covers everything. Oh, the remains of the House of Night were absorbed into the government. Saint Jet is the de facto leader of the government, as well as the new captain of the Night Garden. Nightwalker glanced at Jet once again, then looked at Knave and Bloodwave. His expression grew distant for a short while, but cleared eventually. Good to know. He studied Sunny silently. Knave and Bloodwave are members of the House of Night, while the beautiful young lady is the captain of the Night Garden. But who are you, kid? Did someone find Shadow God's lineage, after all? Sunny smiled. Someone did. He paused for a moment. Lamb Supreme Sunless, the demigod in charge of conquering this city. 1 a.m. also thousands of years old, so please refrain from calling me kid, young man. Nightwalker stared at him with no particular expression on his youthful face, then looked away and sighed. The world has changed a lot since I've been gone. He walked forward without saying anything else until a wall built of large stone blocks revealed itself from the radiance. Opening the door, Nightwalker walked inside and invited them in. The space inside might have been a storage area once, but it had been turned into a makeshift living space now. There was a luxurious bed, paintings and statuettes decorating the haphazard collection of furniture, and several braziers with cold coals in them. There were also weapons and various tools littering the floor, with large spools of metal wire and long spikes leaning against the walls. It seemed like Nightwalker both lived and prepared his traps here. If anything, this place resembled Sunny's room in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City. More than anything else, most importantly, though, was that there were shadows here. Bright light spilled through the small window near the roof, but most of the storage space was mercifully dark, soothing Sunny's strained eyes. Walking inside, he let out a relieved sigh and pulled the blindfold off. He felt like a fish thrown back into the water. Curiously enough, Sunny had not sensed these shadows from the outside. It was only when he crossed the threshold that he felt their presence, hinting that this building, and perhaps the lighthouse, as well, were able to suppress anyone from peering through their walls. Make yourself at home. Nightwalker walked over to one of the braziers and made fire. Then, he looked around with a faintly lost expression. Sorry, I don't think I have any food or beverages to offer you. I don't actually remember the last time I ate something. In the silence that followed, Knave sighed and asked the question that had been on all of their minds from the second they met the miraculously surviving founder of the House of Night. You are one of those immortals now, aren't you? Nightwalker regarded him with a neutral expression. Aren't we all immortal here, in the Eternal City? He shrugged, and then sat down in a decadently opulent chair. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. I died here, and then, the Eternal City brought me back. So, I am one of its immortals now. Knave drew a shaky breath. But you are not corrupted, like the rest of them. Nightwalker shook his head slowly. No. Not yet, at least. In fact, none of the immortals are corrupted. Sunny frowned. TL have to disagree. Knave nodded. Indeed. We've seen them. Jet and the Lord of Shadows fought them, as well. How can those nightmare creatures not be corrupted? Nightwalker lingered for a moment. Ah, sorry. I should rather say that the abominations you faced are not the immortals. He leaned back and sighed. The actual immortals aren't really alive anymore. Their bodies are intact and their souls are intact, but their minds have long crumbled. They are like empty dolls with nothing inside. Well, at least there wasn't anything inside them, initially. Nightwalker looked at them darkly. That was before a certain abomination came to the Eternal City, crawled into them, and rooted itself within their immortal bodies. So, the things that you saw and fought is that abomination wearing the bodies of the immortals. It's a parasite. Sunny frowned. I don't suppose you know what that abomination is called. Nightwalker turned to him and smiled. Oh, naturally I do. His smile dimmed, and was then erased from his face. It's called the Flesh of Connacht. 2655 Cursed King. Hearing Nightwalker's words, Sunny frowned. Connacht. I've heard that name before. Jet had fought a great devil named the Heart of Connacht, as well as several lesser nightmare creatures bearing similar names. According to Cassie, he had been a cursed king whose parts were kept apart to prevent him from coming back to life. More importantly, Uris had mentioned an individual called Connacht once, when talking about those cursed by Shadow God. Considering how countless traces of Connacht were left in the dream realm, he must have been quite powerful. And considering the nature of these traces, he must have been quite sinister. Now, they were facing a great terror born of the same source, a being of the same caliber as Skinwalker. Who the hell is Connacht, though? Nightwalker smiled wryly. Just an old myth. He hesitated for a short while, then sighed. He was supposedly one of the first humans, born at the dawn of the Age of Gods. Gods and deities walked the earth back then, battling void creatures and their spreading corruption. they brushed sides with humans quite often, as well, to various results. Most of those encounters were benign in nature, but not all of them. Connacht in particular managed to anger Shadow God, somehow, so Shadow God took his shadow away, and with it, his ability to die. Sunny scratched his head. Doesn't sound like much of a punishment. In a sense, he was the opposite of Connacht. Sunny had more shadows than he knew what to do with. One was cursed by Shadow God, the other received Shadow God's blessing. The latter could be said about Sunny and Uris, as well. Nightwalker grinned, a very topical remark, considering where we are. He fell silent for a moment. Gods have their own views on things, I guess. In any case, Connacht did not seem to mind the curse of Shadow God. Eventually, he established a vast kingdom and ruled it for myriad generations, defending his people with his overwhelming power. His power was so great, in fact, that people started calling him a god. Sunny raised an eyebrow, but Nightwalker shrugged. But Connacht didn't just want to be called a god, he wanted to be a god. Sunny leaned against a wall and crossed his arms. Ah, that troublesome thing, apotheosis. Nightwalker stared at him blankly. A what? Apotheosis? Oh, I guess the word fits. Sunny had to remind himself that the man had been gone for decades. Even the existence of Supremes was news to him. Naturally, he would not know about the impenetrable barrier that prevented them from climbing higher on the path of ascension. He shook his head. Anyway, so what happened? Nightwalker answered in a neutral tone. No matter what Connacht tried, he could not step over the threshold of divinity, not without a shadow, at least. He became obsessed with the idea of godhood, and his kingdom gradually became a dark and nightmarish place. People who used to venerate and worship him were now full of terror and hatred for the undying monster who ruled them, and entire generations disappeared into the ghastly cauldron of his obse Sajan. They could not do anything to free themselves, though. After all, Connacht's power was overwhelming, and he could not be killed. He leaned forward a little. They did manage to topple his throne in the end, still. Connacht's body was severed from his soul and spirit, cut into pieces, and all these parts were sealed separately in various places, never to be reunited. The end. Sunny stared at him incredulously. It's obviously not the end, though. Nightwalker smiled. Well, assume those seals were guarded by someone. However, the guardians all perished when the dream realm was consumed by corruption. The seals weakened after a while, and the same corruption took hold of the severed remains of Connacht. Those pieces eventually became horrid abominations. He fell silent for a while, then added in a grim tone. I'll only know about this because I had the misfortune of visiting the kingdom of Connacht in one of my nightmares. The interesting part, however, is not what he did to earn the curse of Shadow God, and not what happened to his severed parts. It is not even what will happen if those parts fuse back together one day. Nightwalker leaned back. The interesting part is how Connacht was overthrown, and why. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Oh, Nightwalker lingered for a few moments. The being who helped the enslaved people of Connacht's kingdom get rid of him was none other than the Demon of Repose, who happened to pass nearby. As for why she decided to help them, according to the myth, it was because after countless years of searching, Connacht finally found a way to become a god despite being disqualified from achieving divinity the usual way. Sunny's eyes widened a little. He remained silent for a few moments, then leaned forward. He found an alternative way to achieve apotheosis. How? Nightwalker studied him a bit, then shrugged. Lamb not entirely sure, but apparently, he was planning to consume his own kingdom, complete with every person living there. So, not the best role model, as far as kingship goes. He gave Sunny a curious glance. If only that poor fool lived in the age where the nightmare spell existed, huh? All that nonsense could have been avoided. Nightwalker fell silent for a while, then asked. You told me that the first Supremes emerged decades ago, right? Sunny nodded. Around 25 years ago, yes. Nightwalker looked away with a pensive expression. How come none of them challenged the fifth nightmare, then? Sunny tilted his head a little. I guess it's because one of them is stuck on the moon, while the other two were misguided, afraid, and had too much to lose. Nightwalker looked at him directly. What about you? Are you not misguided and afraid? Do you have nothing to lose? Sunny smiled faintly. Me? No, and I am in a completely different situation than they were. He looked at Nightwalker and said in an even tone. Because of the decades they wasted, I am not afforded the luxury of having a choice. The end of days is not on the horizon anymore, it is already in progress. So it's become sacred or die, or at least watch everything I treasure die. Sunny sighed. That is the reason why I'm here, in the Eternal City. Conquering this place is a part of the process. 2656 Dubious Conquest. Nightwalker studied him for a long while with the same strangely distant expression he had worn previously, then smiled faintly. Conquering the Eternal City. I am not going to diminish your accomplishments. Getting to the lighthouse unscathed must have already been difficult enough. Well done. However, you should have noticed that this place is populated by a myriad of immortal abominations. Surely, your goal is a tad too ambitious. Sunny gave him a nonchalant shrug. Personally, I think it's just ambitious enough. Jet chuckled. You must not have witnessed the power of a supreme before, mister. It is quite daunting. And that guy is not just any supreme. At that, he's someone who became supreme by killing the person who sat on the throne before him, which puts him in an entirely different category. She smiled. I wouldn't have brought the Night Guardian here if I wasn't reasonably confident in his ability to keep his promises. Despite how he looks, he's quite reliable. Sunny gave her a silent stare. Huh, what's wrong with how I look? Not getting an answer, he frowned and glanced back at Nightwalker. She's right. My forces have already secured the wharf and the island it is connected to. Currently, we are engaged in a battle for the 3 islands north of that. I expect the siege to come to a conclusion in a few hours, which would allow us to advance further, into the heart of the city. Nightwalker studied him with interest. Really? How are you dealing with the immortals, then? Sunny gave him an even look. Lamb putting them to sleep. Although now that I know what hides in the water, I am thinking of just tossing them into the waves. Nightwalker shook his head slowly. That won't work. Sunny was a little disappointed. Why? The lost founder of the House of Night let out a heavy sigh, as if recalling his own disastrous attempt to do just that. As I said, the immortals are merely shells for the parasite that controls them. So, you can indeed get rid of them by throwing them into the water. Some would climb out, but most would become an endless source of sustenance for the little critters there. However, his expression darkened. A parasite is a parasite. Once one host becomes useless, it will find another, and with myriad abominations populating the depths, the flesh of Connacht would have countless new hosts to infect. Once thousands of those fishes start mutating, sprouting tendrils, and climbing ashore, you'll regret having fed them an immortal or two in the past. Believe me, he shivered. Sunny was quite uneasy, as well. He hummed, then mumbled quietly. Wow, I never thought that one day I'd be happy to only be fighting the human vessels of an immortal Great Terror. His expression twisted a little. Flesh of Connacht is a great terror, right? He had assumed so because the fallen immortals wielded power similar to that of great nightmare creatures. Considering that Nightwalker did not mention any kind of source creature or accursed abomination congealing them, the flesh of Connacht did not seem like a tyrant. As for being a titan, it could be one, but Sunny would have expected more trouble when facing a creature like that. As if fighting a city full of immortal great ones is not trouble enough. Nightwalker nodded. I would expect so. He studied Sunny intensely, then shifted slightly. Well, I guess you really do have a chance to conquer this hell. Unbelievable. His expression turned wistful for a brief moment. And there I was, feeling proud of myself for becoming a transcendent. At that moment, Knave, who had been silent before, finally spoke. The flesh of Connacht is not our only problem. Nightwalker gave him a curious look. Oh, Knave hesitated a little, then nodded. The Dutchman is also here. Nightwalker's eyes widened a little. That thing, it followed you to the Eternal City. The House of Night had never engaged in a serious battle against the Dutchman, but having traveled the misty waters of the Stormzea for decades, they had known about the existence of the Wraith Armada from various chilling encounters and sightings long before this expedition. Nightwalker probably knew more than most. Sunny shrugged. It's more like we followed it here. It doesn't matter who arrived first, though, only who will be the one to leave when all is said and done. Jet here is a specialist in disposing of troublesome wraiths. In fact, she's somewhat of a wraith herself. Jet smiled. When I'm in the mood. Nightwalker chuckled. Then, however, his expression slowly grew serious. A heavy silence settled in the room. Sunny studied Nightwalker and Knave, wondering why their reunion was so reserved. The former seemed too aloof, while the latter was seemingly holding himself back. But neither displayed any noticeable sense of joy. Perhaps they were simply too shocked to feel anything easily defined yet. Maybe they had never had a joyful kind of relationship, to begin with. He hesitated for a few moments, then asked. If I may ask, how did you end up stuck in this city, Nightwalker? Better yet, How did you manage to get here alone? As Amir ascended. The corner of Nightwalker's mouth twitched. Mir ascended. Huh. He remained silent for a while, then sighed. Who said that I was alone? Sunny frowned. That was the impression got after learning about your disappearance from Naive and Bloodwave. Nightwalker shook his head. I wasn't alone. I was accompanied by that kid, Astarion, and his followers. Sunny winced. I'd appreciate it if you would not mention his name. Nightwalker grinned. Oh, I would be happy to. I don't particularly like mentioning him either. At that moment, Jet asked in a confused tone. Why would you take him with you instead of forming an expedition from the champions of the House of Night? And why did you leave the Night Garden behind? Nightwalker smiled. That's simple. Because I did not want to lose the Night Garden, and I did not want my people to die. Plus, you said that you were putting the immortals to sleep. I was planning to do something similar. Fighting them physically is useless, so I needed someone with a powerful aspect that allowed them to perform mental attacks. Such people are rare, and that kid seemed like a good candidate, being the successor of Heart God and all. His expression darkened. Nightwalker remained silent for a few moments, and then said in a cold tone, Of course, I did not expect that the bastard would kill me as soon as we reached the city and he didn't need me anymore. 2657 Gift of Empathy. Knave paled visibly when he heard Nightwalker's admission. Even Bloodwave, who had maintained a stoic expression, scowled deeply. Jet frowned, as well, but Sunny did not show much of a reaction. After all, he already suspected that something of the kind had happened. However, behind his mask of nonchalance, he was a little excited. Perhaps it was a bit callous of him to feel thrilled about Astarion's betrayal and subsequent murder of Nightwalker, an act that might have prevented the House of Night from nurturing a sovereign of their own, eventually, but he was simply glad to finally meet someone who knew about the Dreamspawn's powers firsthand and was willing to share that knowledge. Sunny lingered for a moment. Mental attacks. What is his aspect, exactly? Nightwalker gave him a look of indignation. That is what you chose to ask about? Really? Sunny stared at him with a deadpan expression. Yes. Nightwalker laughed. Are all Supremes this? Never mind. I'm not one to judge. Sunny raised an eyebrow, prompting Bloodwave to speak gruffly. You know how no one knows much about Nightwalker. That is not because of his elusive and mysterious nature. He simply used to avoid everyone, his closest allies included, as much as possible, because he hates people. He has always been a reclusive, antisocial bastard. Nightwalker grinned. True, it's not my fault that people are so hateful, though, is it? Shaking his head, he added. And considering how I ended up, I'd say that I had not avoided people enough. Nightwalker fell silent for a few moments, then sighed. Regardless, to answer your question, he's a mind reader. Sunny's eyebrows flew up. A mind reader? What do you mean? Nightwalker brushed his face tiredly. The Dreamspawn, the last survivor of the Path of Ascension cult. He is a mind reader, although he did not start out as one. Sunny and Jet glanced at each other. Cassie, are you hearing this? He only had to wait a few moments before the answer came. Yes. Nightwalker, meanwhile, continued. His dormant ability allowed him to sense the emotions of other living beings. He was an empath, of sorts. His awakened ability is a bit sinister, it allows him to feed on the powerful emotions of others, consuming them. It was his ascended ability that made me take him to the Eternal City, however. That one allowed him to influence the emotions of others with his own. His expression grew somber. His abilities underwent a bit of an evolution when he ascended, though. The scope of his dormant ability increased to include not only emotions, but also the thoughts of others. And his ascended ability was the same, it allowed him to put his thoughts into other people's heads. Nightwalker grimaced. He had always been a creepy kid, and these three powers made being in his company even creepier. Because even with fearsome mental defenses, you never could be quite sure that your thoughts and emotions were your own. Even if they were, you knew that he could read you like an open book. That made being around him uncomfortable, or it would have, if he did not know just the right words to say to put people at ease. Nightwalker chuckled bitterly. He was capable, effortlessly charming, devilishly smart, and strong. Really strong, but despite all that, you could not help but feel a little uneasy around him, from time to time. Because once in a while, for a brief moment, it felt like there was something deeply wrong about him, hiding in the depths of his eyes. Ah, but of course, that feeling was easy to explain by the prejudice everyone had about him. Nightwalker shrugged. After all, he was a stranger. Someone from outside the bounds of the world we were familiar with. Those Path of Ascension zealots had always been a weird bunch, and nobody knew what happened to them in the dream realm. So, it was difficult not to feel distrustful of that kid. That's how others felt, at least. Personally, I didn't care too much. His smile turned a little bitter. Perhaps I should have. Sunny, meanwhile, was thinking about Astarion's aspect. Empath, mind reader, mental manipulator, and what does it mean, he consumed other people's emotions? Was he like an energy vampire? He remained silent for a while, then could not help but ask a senseless question: what about his transcendent ability? What about his domain? Nightwalker gave him a confused look. How should I know? He was a mere ascended the last time I saw him. Sunny grimaced. Right. After pausing for a moment, he asked. So what did he want to find here, in the Eternal City? And why did he turn on you? Nightwalker scratched the back of his head. What he wanted to find here, 1 a.m. not sure, since everything he had told me turned out to be a lie. No matter what it was, though, he must have failed to find it. You see, we were too weak, he and I. All we knew about this place was what I had seen here as a sleeper, so we might have overestimated ourselves and underestimated the Eternal City. What could two masters do here, really? He was already lucky to escape alive. Nightwalker glanced at Sunny with a dark expression. As to why he turned on me, perhaps that was his main goal all along. I did not think that it was possible, but he wanted to absorb the lineage of Storm God. Divine lineages can't coexist with each other, but when it comes to the Dreamspawn, they somehow can, even if I learned it too late. His silver eyes glistened dangerously. He could have entered the lighthouse and attempted to receive the lineage like I had done once, a long time ago, but he chose to stab me in the back instead. To his credit, I don't think that he was aiming to kill me. But I was too stubborn to surrender, so in the end, he did. Nightwalker sighed. It was a hollow end, to survive all the horrors of the nightmare spell only to die by a human's hand. Saying that, he looked away and added in a distant tone. And it was a bitter beginning, to come back to life in this cursed city, knowing that I am destined to die here thousands of times more. 2658 Tempered Blade. Sunny looked around, noting the spools of razor-sharp wire and steel spikes. Remembering the grotesque scenes hiding in the beautiful radiance of the lighthouse island, he felt a chill running down his spine and asked in a neutral tone. So that is how you spent these decades? Escaping the immortals and building traps to keep them away from your hideout? Nightwalker regarded him silently for a long while, then smiled. I don't remember. Sunny raised an eyebrow. You don't remember? Nightwalker chuckled. Well, remember this and that. In the beginning, I was an ascended, life was hard. Those abominations were simply too overwhelming, so I died a lot. Sometimes, I managed to escape. Most times, I did not. And eventually, I went mad. I don't recall what happened after that clearly. Relaxing in his chair, he shrugged. But I regained my senses after a while. And then, I lost my mind again, and then, I found it again. Time lost all meaning. I would not have known that I have been here for decades instead of centuries or thousands of years if you had not told me. His expression grew distant and detached. At some point, I found a seed of nightmare. There's a few here, in the Eternal City, but I could only get close to one. I challenged it and died. The city brought me back to life, so I challenged it again. Eventually, I conquered it and became a transcendent. Things did not get easy after that, but they did become easier. At least I could fight the immortals, finally. Nightwalker smiled, and something dark and perilous gleamed in his eyes. So that was what I've been doing for the last 10 years, I guess. Fighting great nightmare creatures all day, every day. To kill time. It was at this point that Sunny realized two dreadful facts. The first fact was that the amicable youth in front of him was not just a legendary figure from the early years of the nightmare spell, an outstanding but antiquated person whose achievements had been swallowed by the passage of time. No, Nightwalker was something else. He was the most dangerous saint in the world, by far. 10 years, he says. If Nightwalker had been battling great nightmare creatures tirelessly for a decade, a mere transcendent, no less, then he had accumulated more combat experience than every other saint combined. These 10 years were a harrowing crucible capable of forging a blade so frightening that no other weapon could ever withstand its sharp edge. Nightwalker had already been one of the most accomplished warriors of the most ill-fated generation in history before returning to the Eternal City and transcending. Now, he would be a monster. And the second fact, was that Nightwalker was either the most insane awakened in the world, or the most sane one. Sunny was not sure which statement was true. The young man seemed composed enough, which could mean that he was either completely unhinged and hiding it well, or had somehow managed to preserve his sanity despite experiencing long years of complete isolation and a myriad of gruesome deaths without allowing his mind to shatter completely. In any case, want to recruit him? Sunny's eyes glistened. He had come to the Eternal City to find treasure, and he felt like he had just found it. The perfectly preserved arsenal of powerful enchanted weapons was a good discovery, but this one man was worth far more. In a world falling into the hungry maw of apocalypse, an exceptional champion like that was a priceless commodity. Nightwalker shifted uncomfortably under his gaze and coughed. If you keep looking at me like that, you'll make me blush. Sunny smiled slowly. All day, every day, you say. Must have been fun. Nightwalker gave him a surprised look. Well, I wouldn't call it fun, personally. But actually, it wasn't too bad. He smiled. As Bloodwave mentioned, I am not very fond of people. Why would I spend most of my life wandering the sea otherwise? So, on one hand, spending all these years in a city populated only by nightmare creatures was a bit of a chore. But, on the other hand, I enjoyed the peace and quiet. Sunny could not help but let out a scoff. This guy, I like him. At that moment, Nightwalker turned his smile to Jet and winked. Of course, there's an exception to every rule. I am actually fond of some instances of human companionship quite a lot. I should probably kill that guy. Ah, damnation. Nightwalker was immortal here, in the Eternal City. Leaning forward a little, Sunny asked. In a pleasant tone, Saint Nightwalker, how would you like to get out of the Eternal City and return to the surface world? Nightwalker looked at him in confusion. Saint? That's a bit weird. Believe me, I am no saint. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Oh, right, Nightwalker was probably old enough to be his grandfather. That's what we call transcendence. Akin to masters. Nightwalker tilted his head a little. Saints? Well, I guess it has a ring to it. Yeah, I like it. Smiling, he inhaled deeply and looked into the distance. Of course, I would love nothing more than to leave this cursed place. But it's not that easy. Sunny shook his head. Actually, it is. I can send you back right now. All he had to do was ask Nephis to open a dream gate in front of the lighthouse. That would involve quite a bit of risk, naturally, but it was possible. Nightwalker shook his head. No, you don't understand. I simply can't leave. Once you die in the Eternal City, you become its prisoner, for as long as it exists. And it is, you know, eternal. He chuckled quietly. Why do you think Repose created this place? Did you think that she wanted to create a peaceful paradise for virtuous creatures to enjoy for all eternity? He shook his head with a twisted smile. No, the demon of Repose, she was a complete psychopath, that one. What she wanted to create was a place to gather all the creatures that she hated, the worst of the worst, so that they would never be able to escape from her. Nightwalker laughed. The Eternal City is a prison. 2659 Prison of Eternity. Sunny remained silent for a long while, studying Nightwalker with a distant expression. Eventually, he asked, a prison? The youth nodded, his silver eyes glistening with nebulous light. Indeed, maybe she glanced at what Shadow God had done to Connacht and was inspired, perhaps the idea simply came from her own devious head. In any case, the immortality this hell grants its victims comes at a price. And that price is having to stay here forever. Sunny frowned subtly. Nightwalker knew that those who were made immortal by the Eternal City could never leave their beautiful cage for as long as the Eternal City existed. However, his guess at what had motivated the Demon of Repose to build it seemed to be based mostly on his own perception of what this place was. In truth, Sunny suspected that the real reason was not that unambiguous. None of them knew what motivated the mysterious demon, but he did know a few things about her kind. For example, he knew that all other demons had wrestled with the unconditional taboo placed upon them by the gods and the loneliness that resulted from adhering to that prohibition. So, had the Demon of Repose truly wanted to torment the prisoners of the Eternal City forever? Or had she simply been unwilling to part with those who won her favor? The answer to that question was now lost, erased by the currents of time. Even if she had intended to build a paradise for those who were weary, she would have had to find a way to avoid their gratitude. Because if she had not, the Eternal City would have been destroyed, just like the Kingdom of Hope had been destroyed. Perhaps that was why the Demon of Repose had wandered the world on her living ship instead of residing in the paradise of her creation. Maybe being unwilling to part with those who settled in the Eternal City and tormenting them eternally were not two conflicting possibilities but cause and effect instead. Maybe she had indeed been a twisted, demented psychopath. There was a reason why the demons had been feared so much, after all. In any case, as much as the secrets of the Eternal City tantalized Sunny, satisfying his curiosity was not his main concern. His main concern was benefiting from the expedition to the Eternal City as much as possible. They had already initiated The Restoration of the Night Garden and reached the lighthouse. At the very least, the Saints of Night would be able to use the memory Nightwalker had used all those years ago and capture some of the starlight trapped within, thus ensuring the continuation of their bloodline. Sunny still had to find the fragment of Weaver's lineage. But now, he had a new goal as well. He glanced at Nightwalker. So you can't leave the Eternal City for as long as it exists? Nightwalker nodded. Yes. Sunny remained silent for a few seconds, then said in a neutral tone. Let's destroy the Eternal City, then. Nightwalker laughed. Knave and Bloodwave looked at Sunny, and even Jet smiled. However, his expression remained the same. Ah, that's a good one. Nightwalker shook his head and looked at Sunny with a wry smile. At least you have a sense of humor. From everything you guys told me about Supremes, I expected them all to be exceedingly serious. Sunny looked around the room in confusion. Point one, I'm not joking, though. Knave and Bloodwave seemed taken aback. Nightwalker's smile faltered for a moment. He stared at Sunny with a strange expression, then said in a dubious tone, so, you, want to destroy the Eternal City? Ah, I see. Sunny shrugged. We had several main goals to achieve here. Repair the Night Garden, gain access to Stormgod's lineage, find a certain thing that I am personally interested in, and maybe get our hands on some valuables. Of course, he hoped to conquer the Eternal City and make it a part of the human domain, if possible, but that does not seem very plausible anymore. It seems less beneficial than making you a part of the human domain, at least. He looked at Nightwalker with a wistful expression. Talent is the most precious resource in the world, after all. And we desperately lack resources for what is about to come. So, yes, if it means adding one more special strategic asset to the forces of humanity, I'm willing to turn this entire place to ruin. Nightwalker studied him silently for a moment. It's called the Eternal City for a reason, though. Are you not familiar with the concept of eternity? Sunny grinned. Lamb painfully familiar with such concepts, actually. I once fought an infinite rat. Another time, I fought an endless worm. Both are dead now, by the way. I bet there is a way to destroy this prison city, as well. I have yet to find a prison that I could not escape. He hesitated for a moment, then added, what makes this city eternal is the divine sorcery of the Demon of Repose. I am an accomplished sorcerer myself, so know better than most that any kind of sorcery can be destroyed, as long as you know how it functions. There has to be some kind of mechanism that allows the Eternal City to continue existing even in the absence of its creator, so if we reveal that mechanism, breaking it should solve the problem. A slight frown creased his brow. Of course, we will have to deal with the Dutchman first. We will also have to destroy the flesh of Conic to prevent it from escaping into the dream realm. And make sure that we don't drown if the dome protecting this sunken city comes down. Nightwalker gave him a deadpan stare. That's all. Sunny shook his head. Well, I will have to accomplish my personal goal before we venture to end eternity. But if we do, how about it, old man? Care to pick up your sword again? He paused for a moment and added awkwardly. Or whatever your preferred weapon is, I mean. The beautiful youth remained silent for a while, and then smiled faintly. Sure, why not? If you destroy the Eternal City, I'll pick up whatever you want. His tone suggested that he was not taking Sunny's suggestion seriously. However, Sunny was dead serious. He was both dead and serious, in fact, which added all his promises grave weight. 2660 Meet Your Heroes. Sometime later, Sunny and Jet found themselves standing alone outside Nightwalker's hideout. They had left him alone with Bloodwave and Knave out of tact, to let the Saints of Night have a private conversation. The radiance of the lighthouse surrounded them like a radiant veil, and a cool wind caressed their faces. Somewhere far away, the Shadow Legion was embroiled in a fierce battle, besieged from all sides, and slowly gaining the upper hand. Sunny sighed. Nightwalker, I can't believe he's still alive. Standing by his side, Jet looked at him and nodded. Yeah, it's like meeting one of your childhood heroes, who supposedly died decades ago. Only the hero is perfectly alive and looks younger than you, and you're the one who's dead instead. Sunny blinked a couple of times. That's one way to put it. He glanced at her and frowned. So what do you think? Jet hesitated for a while. I think you were right. Returning from this expedition with Nightwalker will be a great boon. He has become even more outstanding than he used to be, it seems, and he used to be legendary. Her expression darkened a little. Lamb, not entirely sure that we can trust him, though. Sunny raised an eyebrow. How so? Jet shrugged. I've hunted down plenty of awakened who couldn't handle the weight of the nightmare spell and went insane, you know. We do not know how damaged that man truly is, considering what he went through. Hopefully, he's fine, or rather, broken in a controllable manner. But we will have to wait and see. Her expression turned a little concerned. There is something strange about his story, as well. Don't you think? The Dreamspawn supposedly betrayed and killed him, but why would that man go into all the trouble of traveling to the Eternal City just to kill Nightwalker? He could have done that anywhere else and gotten the lineage of Storm God anyway. Additionally, the act of killing Nightwalker itself seems peculiar. Wouldn't the Dreamspawn have known that he would come to life? Sunny sighed and glanced away. Perhaps he wanted Nightwalker to rot in the Eternal City forever. But yes, I share these concerns. I really hope they won't come to pass, though. For what it's worth, he doesn't seem insane, or, at least, he seems like the right kind of insane. And believe me, I know a lot about insane. He grinned. A few seconds later, his smile dimmed. In any case, for now, the expedition gained another powerful member. One who knows the Eternal City way better than we do, at that. Jet nodded. The two of them remained silent for a while, looking at the wall of the lighthouse. Eventually, Sunny said, I think Knave is going to go inside. Unlike Ether and Bloodwave, and Nightwalker himself, he inherited the lineage instead of absorbing it. I am not sure what the difference is, but there seems to be one for the members of the House of Night. Jet smiled faintly. It makes sense, I guess. Storm God is the god of journeys and guidance, so her heirs can't just receive their inheritance. They have to find their way to it. Sunny remained silent for a while, then glanced at her and asked in a curious tone, Are you going to TRU? Entering the lighthouse and receiving Storm God's lineage, I mean. Jet hesitated a little, then shook her head. No, why should I? Sunny raised an eyebrow. Because possessing a divine lineage grants you power. Nightwalker, Immortal Flame, Warden of Valor, Kisong, even the Dreamspawn. All of them had accomplished so much because they possessed one. Jet chuckled. Or maybe they received those lineages because they were the kind of people to accomplish that much. She glanced at Sunny and shrugged. Knave mentioned that not just anyone can assimilate a divine lineage, and that it's a fatal gamble. From what I understand, success does not depend on how powerful or resilient you are, it is more of a question of affinity. And I don't really have any affinity to Storm God in her various aspects. So, I am not keen on taking the risk. Jet glanced away and shrugged. And to be honest, I have no interest in inheriting the legacy of dead gods. They failed in the end, after all. So it's a legacy of failure. I don't need it, instead, I'd rather leave behind a legacy of my own. Sunny smiled. How arrogant, but it was also strangely compelling. He sighed, thinking about his own quest to assemble the fragments of Weaver's lineage. Jet, meanwhile, asked. What about you? Sunny raised an eyebrow. Me. Oh, I can't absorb the lineage of Storm God. I might be able to benefit from being exposed to it, though. Bloodweave had swallowed the lineage of Storm God and grown stronger from it. Granted, Sunny had an inherent affinity to shadows, and that lineage had been received from an aspect legacy, in other words, it had been presented to him by the spell. So, there was a chance that he would be able to swallow the lineage of Storm God, as well. But Sunny was not sure that the risk was worth it. After all, if he was incapacitated even for a short while, the Shadow Legion would be decimated, and their expedition would come to an abrupt end. He sighed. I feel like it's a little irresponsible for me to NTG the lighthouse now. Sunny grinned. But who am I kidding? Of course, I will enter. Jet clicked her tongue. And I have just boasted about how reliable you are. They both remained silent for a while after that, surrounded by a blinding silver radiance. Eventually, Jet asked, Are you really going to try and destroy the Eternal City? Sunny smiled. Sure, despite all my accomplishments, I have yet to destroy a single city, you know. And something like that will look really good on my resume.